G'day, I'm an Australian arboriculturalist, Cassian Humphreys, here on a Denmark property in Western Australia. You can see the inland sea at my back just there. So let's go for a walk. So walking up the driveway, we're here to do a tree assessment. Our subject tree is in a traffic island, surrounded by a dirt road which rings around the tree. Coming up the driveway to my trusted steed, the legendary DR650, I'm just going to go and sit down and give you a bit of background to this tree. Though I was not born an Australian, I've been in Australia for most of my career, so I get to call myself an Australian arboriculturalist. So what is the veteran tree? Well, a veteran, under the law of trees, is a tree which has been damaged by an event. It could be as a result of earthworks, it could be as a result of root severance, it could be as a result of a tree lopper climbing it and cutting it in half, it could be as a result of a storm. But the tree that we're here to see today is a veteran, and it was veteranized by fire. Our subject traffic island tree is a Jarrah tree, or Eucalyptus marginata. The dirt road, as discussed before, is a heavily compacted desertified environment. Though the traffic island is approximately 10 meters by 7 meters. So it's a reasonable area where there actually is associate vegetation. I've counted around about 12 different species that is growing, native species which is growing in association with our subject tree. Though the area has got a footpath running through the centre of it, so you can see there is a bit of a reduction in vegetative capacity here. This footpath also constitutes a compacted root zone. Coming around to the southern side of the tree, looping around the dirt road, we can gain a perspective on the tree here. This tree was, as well as being veteranized by fire, was also veteranized by its topping or felling of its upper crown. But when we see the tree's western side, we can gain an understanding as to why the topping of the tree in this case wasn't such a bad move, because we have fire damage. We have an open cavity on the eastern and western sides, and the tree is essentially standing on stilts. On this eastern side you can see this sort of a russet kind of discoloration. Well, that's evidence that the tree has been growing reactively on this side. So the tree is compensating with the growth of reaction wood to help stabilize itself. Moving around to the eastern side of the tree, here we can see the fire damage. It does look like there has been lightning strike as well, so this tree is pretty much a triple veteran. But this kind of damage is caused by hot fires or out of control fires. The traditional fires that the First Nations people did were known as cold burns, and generally, fires didn't get out of hand whilst they were the land custodians. At the base of the tree we can see a grass tree. We can also see the Australian bluebell, Billarderia fusiformis, a beautiful plant. But coming back to our subject tree, well, we can, as discussed, we can see these two stilts of timber which hold the tree up. Trees of this kind of reduced structure can stand in the bush for decades. And when we consider that the tree has been reduced, well, I personally do not see a problem with this tree at all, and I'd be happy to live with it. A subject such as this is an important tree for habitat. Like there'd be microbats living in the tree. With these hollows, there's plenty of opportunity for wildlife to be living. With regards to the tree's upper crown, it is comprised as what is known as epicormic crown structure, which is transitioning into endocormic, which as these replacement limbs or leaders lay down wood so they become structurally more stable. But with this specimen, you know, I would be recommending, you know, like some light crown reductions as a way of maintaining the tree as it is. I wouldn't let it get too much taller. You know, I mean, if the tree was to fail, we want it to fall short of the owner's property. It can also be said of the Jarrah tree that, you know, very few of these fall over. I mean, just driving around the roads through the southwest of Western Australia and looking at the remnant forests and counting the number of trees on the ground. I mean, they tend to stand dead and then just die back from the upper crown slowly over many years in time. When I talk about light crown reduction, I'm actually making reference to volume reductions. You know, we can reduce a tree's height by as little as an all over 5%, but in doing so, we're reducing the volume by much more. You know, 5% crown reduction is equivalent to a 30% volume reduction when we think of overall scale of foliage. As a climbing arborist, the way in which I would access this tree is I would actually put a lifeline at the top of this neighbouring gum tree. It's a marri, and then from there I would access those upper leaders. And the goal is really to reduce the terminals. You know, it's enough just to reduce terminal buds in trees to encourage them to hedge. If you think of trees which are naturally wind pruned, or say trees which overhang bus lanes, you know, repetitious striking of buds with the passing buses actually is a form of hedging. And you know, with pruning, you know, keeping wounds in the sapwood, keeping, you know, large diameter wounds out of trees. Large diameter wounds have a tendency to oxygenate the heartwood, which accelerates decay and decline. Coming back to the traffic island, if I was to be commissioned to carry out health treatment on such a tree, I would look at doing decompaction work on the footpath running through the centre of the traffic island. You know, it would be very viable to treat this area to help get more oxygen into that zone, and then, you know, revegetate with other understory associate plants just to help close the canopy in this region. In closing on this subject tree, I thought I would just draw your attention to the marri gum beside. This is a good example of a tree which had a lower leader removed, quite a large limb, and you can see that the tree has generated tissue largely over the remnant limb that was there. Still a little bit of closure occurring. You can still see the exposed heartwood in the center there. So trees are like Russian dolls. They grow new tissue over old. They're generating organisms. The way in which that I decompact soils is to mimic what nature does. You know, nature makes fissures, vertical fissures. You know, if we think back to my first podcast looking at desertification and looking at the role of dandelions, well, dandelions actually make fissures in the soil. So we can make fissures, whether it's by hand, whether we hand fork, whether we're using machinery such as an auger, a power head with an auger bit, even with using some of the arboricultural machines, such as the Voigt, which is a machine. Likewise, it makes fissures in the soil. We make vertical fissures and we fill those fissures with compost, and then nature tends to open those fissures up horizontally. And in closing on this section, the last thing I would do would be I'd make a whole series of larger fissures around the whole island and put bollards in, just to help keep vehicular traffic away from the stand. I just wish to acknowledge that which I've shared is very much the Naturacultural approach. It's really about conservation. You know, a mainstream arborist would have probably looked at this tree, an individual lacking the education, they would look at a tree like this and just see it as a risk, see it as a hazard, see it as a reason for cranking up the chainsaw, felling it and removing it. But, you know, my focus is on sustainability, which is really about keeping vegetation in the ground if we can, and arboriculture, which is all about culturing trees. Thank you.
I had the afterthought on the Jarrah tree to have made mention that propping such a short tree would be a very viable way to help keep the tree standing up for longer. I also wanted to acknowledge that this filming myself is a new game. You know, there's lots of stuttering and stammering and challenge for me in this way. I'm used to talking to crowds. I'm a real warrior when it comes to talking trees in front of crowds. Before long, I'll be used to using this tech and I'll be solid. But in the meantime, I'm going to walk the walk. This law needs to be shared. I thank you.